Good morning, Cam.
What's up? What's up?
Hold on, we're trying to get our sound going.
Oh, you in that room instead of the big one. I got you.
Sit over here.
Interesting. Doesn't work through that. That's so weird. My speakers on my laptop haven't worked for like 3 weeks and they have no idea why, but I don't know why that would not
Can you hear me
work
though?
through that.
You can hear us, Cam, but we can't hear you. Okay. So.
Do we want to walk?
So it's a perfect world.
No.
Hold on, Samsung. Cam test.
What up, buddy?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
got it. Hey, I'm not
Said you weren't tech savvy.
I'm not IT, but
Pretty close.
pretty close.
Good stuff.
All right, let me grab just a quick.
I'm good, thank you. Good morning.
We were talking about you yesterday, Ashley. Were your ears burning?
No, hopefully nice things.
Of course, very nice things.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
I told Tracy, I said, we had 2 strikes. This is not okay.
I know, I'm just saying. Did y'all have fun? Y'all were at the lake?
We went up to a friend just bought a house on Lanier. And
Oh, fun.
oh no, not fun, because she is another agent for $3.2 million.
Stop it.
Nope, no lies. But
No.
yeah. But I do get to sell her house for $400,000. But not $3.2 million.
I say that's a very small consolation prize.
Yeah, absolutely. And she goes,
What
well,
is
bring a
that?
buyer and you can get both sides. I'm like, doesn't compare to $95,000 payday. Just
Nope.
doesn't.
Nope. Oh, man.
But I loaded
Well-
up Tracy and the girls. They all are on their way back to Fripp Island for the week. Dare's
Oh.
birthday is this week. So
Aw.
friend of Tracy's owns a beach house there. And they said we can have it for $120 for the cost of cleaning fees. So I
That's
said,
nice.
get your ass out of here. Y'all go away. Leave me by myself. This is great. I can go fishing, drink beer.
Hey, how are you?
We're having to pivot and do it in here.
What?
I said, we're having to pivot and do it in here.
Okay.
Yeah, how's it going?
Pretty good, you guys?
Doing
Good.
I'm really good at these. Absolutely.
good.
You have a rough weekend?
Just a night, just a rough night.
You okay?
Yeah, I think I was outside a lot this weekend and the allergies just kind of got to me.
Stop you from.
Mowing your grass? Keeping it
Everything.
looking good?
Yeah, doing all kinds of stuff, yeah. How was yours weekend?
That's good.
It's good. It's good. We were at the beach, which makes it a lot better. Yeah.
Where at?
Your pictures were cute.
30A. We've got friends that have a house in Water Sound and they invite us every year whenever they go, which is nice. We're spoiled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Ashley, this is Connie.
Hey, how are you,
Can
Connie?
Good. Can I ask you a really embarrassing question before many people get on so nobody will know how
Yeah,
stupid
of
I am?
course. Of course.
What happens if I'm representing a seller or anyone's representing a seller and a buyer submits a amendment to address concerns and the seller doesn't respond? What happens?
It kind of depends on how the amendment is worded and what your contract says, but for the most part, the way 95% of people have it set up is that nothing happens, you remain under contract, and none of those concerns make it into the contract. It's like the amendment had never existed. The
Okay,
exception to
Okay.
that is GAR does have a special stipulation that you can add to your contract that says if a buyer submits an amendment to address concerns and the seller does not respond, that amendment to address concerns serves as the notice to terminate. So if your contract
Okay.
has that provision, then if you don't respond, the contract terminates. But as long as it doesn't have that, and honestly, I don't know that I've ever seen someone use it, so it probably doesn't, but you want to double check that. But if it doesn't have that, it's as if the amendment never existed.
okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. I've got like tons of questions today, so
That's great.
I hope you
I
have
would-
time.
Yeah, I would much rather answer questions that y'all need help with than kind of chit chat about what I think might be important. So this is great. Hit me with all the,
Um, Should I keep going?
yeah, go for it.
Okay. Um, I'm representing a seller now and we've just gotten multiple offers. On several of the offers that are good. I've noticed that the loan contingency form, the conventional loan contingency form has a really great interest rate, but I'm concerned that if we accept it as is, and of course, interest rates rise, they could come back and use that as a way to get out of the contract. Isn't that true?
Yeah, the form, and it's not that they can just use it to get out of the contract, it's that if they get denied, then the
Right, well, that's
denial
what I
letter
mean,
would count.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I say that to clarify, because a lot of people use a lot of these contingencies as like willy-nilly, I'm just gonna terminate, but there are more strict guidelines that go along with it. But yeah, the form is set up to say a rate not to exceed that low rate. Now, I don't know that I've really heard that happening where people are really using that to get denied, but yes, theoretically, they could. They could.
So,
So,
for
like, what
instance,
kind of rate are they putting in?
well, one of the rates on the contingency form says a 5.99.
Okay. That, to me, that sounds like a rate that they probably talked to a lender about. I mean, if you see like
Right,
3,
right.
you're like, no way, you're gonna be at a 3, right? But something that is generally close seems more feasible. What I might suggest doing is there contact info for their lender on the contingency form?
Yeah,
I might call
I
that
have
lender and
contact.
say, hey, how is this borrower looking? This is the rate they put. Is this the rate that you quoted them? And if the lender makes you comfortable, I don't know that I would worry about it. Again, you're correct in that they could get denied for that, and then it would match everything. But I think if the lender is telling you that that is the rate that they quoted them, that would at least make me more comfortable.
Yeah, I kind of guess that a lot of agents aren't using it with that intention. They're just throwing in there whatever the lender tells them to put in there.
Yeah,
But I just worried that legally, say, if if they want to get out of the contract, they could request a loan denial. Interest rates, could be 6.5 and the lender could, comply with their request by saying that they no longer qualify for 6.5.
yes, I mean,
Gas rates have increased,
Yeah.
yeah, but they would have to agree to that.
right, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you are correct in that they could do that. Now, the lender, really, if they're a good lender, they shouldn't just willy-nilly issue denial letters. They would have to actually need to deny them off of that interest rate. So I would say if you've got a closing that is, in that 30-day time frame, then the chances of them giving them an interest rate and then requiring that they increase the interest rate are probably very low, right, Matt? Because once you're locked in, unless you're like pulling credit again or your rate lock is expired, that's the rate you're gonna get.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And in that scenario, I think national average today is 6.5%. That's half a point lower than what the national average is. So they really would have to be denied based off of buying down points. Short cash to close. But exactly as Ashley said, once we go under contract, at least smart lender is locking in the rate immediately. So if you've got that worked out in the beginning, there shouldn't be problems later on in the process.
And I think you can figure that out by talking with the lender, right? So you call them and you do you feel comfortable after talking with them, or do you feel like they haven't actually locked anything and they just gave a guess? Then maybe you want to counter back and change that rate. But I also think you're right in that most agents are not putting in a low rate so that they can get out of the contract later. But on the flip side, they might have buyers that say, okay, I talked to my lender, this is the rate, but if the rate goes higher, I can't buy this house. I don't want to buy this house. And so they purposely set it up to not get out of the contract later for other reasons, but to be able to get out of the contract if that rate does go higher than what they're comfortable with, if their lender hasn't locked it in for whatever reason.
I've had-
Right, okay,
I've had listing agents who same situation, they thought that the rate that I was quoting the borrower seemed really low. Had a conversation with them and I've just sent them an email, just so that it was in writing based off of today. Obviously, this could change if there's a big market swing, but based off of this morning's pricing, the client does, qualify for the rate that's been put on the conventional loan exhibits or loan exhibit if it's an FHA deal. And that's made people feel more comfortable. So that could be something that you ask for.
But that would be when they
Yeah.
have it locked in, because if they've been
Right,
locked.
yes,
it's
yeah, but
not
well-
if the prices change, that
Right.
is what the rate is, right?
Yes, yeah, but just for her comfort level, maybe nice to have that in ready.
Mhm.
yeah, our closing date is like 5.5 weeks out, so I guess that would be too early to lock immediately without paying a premium, right?
Yeah, if you're going past 30 days, they'll get hit with about 12.5 basis points. So could be $300, $400, $500 to have a extended lock. So something that's over a 30-day time period, but it's not going to be substantial. They could definitely lock it in.
Okay, thanks. That helps a lot.
Great.
Should I keep going?
Fine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have multiple offers and several of them are good offers, but not perfect offers. If I do multiple counters, what is the risk?
You cannot do multiple counters. So the risk is that you go under contract twice. And so no matter what your seller does, they will be in breach because you can't sell the house twice. You need to pick one and counter it.
So I can't do multiple counters, and then is there a way to withdraw a counter?
Only if it has not been signed, but there's no way to ensure that that won't happen. So I would absolutely not do multiple counters. So for a buyer to put in multiple offers on multiple properties is fine if you have due diligence, because you theoretically could buy two houses at the same time if you have enough money, right? There's no rule saying that you can't do that. Most people can't do that, but if you have a due diligence period, you can terminate and you can just proceed with the house you want to buy. It's maybe not the most ethical way to go about it, but you can do that. From a seller perspective, there is no world in which you can sell the same house to two different people at the same time. You have to only sell it to one. So I think you're setting your client up to get sued by the one you end up not going with. And that's a real problem. And then they're definitely going to look back to you and say, you set this up like this, and you're going to be in a world of hurt. So definitely don't do that. I think you sit down with your client and say, okay, here's the offers. We, maybe want to counter XYZ on this one. Maybe we could do XYZ on this one. How about I call these agents and see which one seems most likely, and then we'll counter with that, because we can only do one at a time.
Okay,
That's the better route to go.
yeah,
for sure.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, one more and I'll shut up. Unless someone else wants to jump in. No. Okay, I got a compliance rejection on another contract that I had in command. And it was another property where I'm representing the seller again. And the compliance person said that the contract was missing a signature and that I needed to correct that with an amendment. So how does that amendment look? Do I have to get the buyer's agent to resubmit the whole PSA with all the exhibits and everything?
Where's the signature missing?
I think it's on the PSA.
So you don't have a fully executed contract? Like whose signature is missing and who are the parties?
It's I think it's the agent. Honestly, Ashley, I haven't looked at this one in a while. I kind of put it on the back burner with this other thing. I think if I recall from glancing at it, it was the buyer's agent signature that's missing.
Okay, okay. You can
I
just,
Did
for
this
the-
one, literally just did this last or yesterday when I went under contract, because I got the contract back, but the buyer agent didn't sign it. And so all I was able to do is just kind of download it and just add it to DocuSign just specifically for the buyer agent to sign. And they send it back binding without any issues at all. So I mean, that's an easy one if it is just them missing this. If it is just the buyer agent missing the signature.
Oh, I know how to do it like you're saying. I just, now that it's gone through compliance, you know, they've sort of changed their criteria and they're looking for everything to be handled through an amendment now.
so if they want an amendment, you could just say, like, whatever broker is representing buyer as client. And then have everybody sign that. I think that's fine.
Just,
Now,
just,
you might could ask compliance too, say, hey, this is the language I'm thinking of putting. Is this gonna make the cut before you go have parties sign it and just run it by them? Because technically, like legally, you have a contract, right? So that's set up, but from a compliance perspective, I get you definitely want them to sign it. But I would just double check with them whether that language is gonna be sufficient or whether they're looking for something a little bit different.
Well, could I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
We've always been told that the agents weren't a party to the contract anyway. So
Right.
the fact that they said that without the buyer's agent signature, does that really have anything to do with the contract being a valid contract?
No, you still have a binding contract. The buyer can't get out of the contract because their agent didn't sign it.
Exactly.
But keep in mind, if you're representing someone as a client, then notice to the agent is notice to the client. And if the agent hasn't signed, then they haven't confirmed their contact info. You can't give notice to the agent. So you want them to sign, you want them to have their contact info, you want them to have signed off saying this is my contact info for notice purposes. And there's different pieces in the contract that are relevant to agents. So you definitely want them to have signed off on it, but it's not grounds to say that the buyer doesn't have to buy the house anymore. You still have a binding contract.
What did we used to call that when we had a binding contract? And yet there were some things that weren't right. And then we went through all this process of trying to do things. Then we could do a conformed copy of the contract.
Mhm.
If we did that, would that solve some of these issues with having to go back and forth with these amendments? Because what's happening is every little thing, when it goes to compliance, it's, well, it's a pain to tell you the truth. So,
yes, agree to that.
and I mean, it's not a new process we're going through. It's horrendous for everybody. So, I'm thinking that we need to just do some conformed copies of the contract and get past all this stuff. Some people are having to do numerous amendments because of little things that weren't checked on a contract.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do. And just so everyone is on the same page, a conformed copy is essentially, and I think it really came about when we used to take counter offers, and every counter offer used to be relevant to the contract. So you might have an offer that says purchase price is 500,000, and then a counter says it's 515 with $10,000 seller credit, and then the other counter changed, like maybe they added a home warranty, and all of them stacked and were relevant. Now that's not the case. Now you have the end counter offer and the purchase and sale. But back when that was a thing that was done, I think it got super confusing, and that's why we have the conform copy stipulation, why people do that. Essentially what it is everyone is just re-signing the contract again, so everything can be on the same document, and it's super easy, super accessible, and there's not any kind of confusion over what is relevant to who and when. But what is really important is that you use that conform copy stipulation. I think GAR's got a special stip for that. And basically it's saying, okay, everybody, the goal is to put everything on the same piece of paper. But if there's any difference between what your contract really says and what we've put on this copy, the original contract does control. Our goal is to not change anything. We're just making it easier for everyone to read. So I think as far as like adding the agent's signature, I feel like that should probably suffice, because I'm guessing they probably signed various amendments and whatnot at this point. That should be fine. But if you are actually changing something, I don't know that I would go that route. I might do an amendment and then the conform copy because of that language that's saying we're not trying to change anything. We're just trying to make it very easy and clear here. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Makes
Nick,
it,
sorry, Ashley, you broke off a couple of times and I missed it. So in my scenario where I just need the agent signature, are you saying I should do a conformed copy or just doing an amendment?
I think I would ask compliance what they want to see. Now, to me, a conform
Mine?
copy should be
Oh,
fine.
compliant.
Yeah, ask your compliance, because for me, that should be fine. But what I'm not necessarily looking at is like across the board compliance stuff. It's like the legality of a contract. So I would double check with them, just say, instead of that, can I do a conform copy adding the agent signature? They might tell you they need an amendment because it wasn't on the original one, so they might be counting that as a change, which fine. But just ask them whether that's an option.
Well,
They
the
w-
note, and Ruth knows more about this than I do, but the note on that I get from compliance says, if you have any questions, ask Ruth or Melba. So,
Yeah.
Ruth.
So when people ask
There
me,
you
I
go.
gee, I thought it was fine, so. But if it's not, we gotta fix it for them. I don't know, but I think just I'm serious. I think some of these things I look at, they're so minute. I don't know why anybody could even care, but we can't, like, for instance, like somebody on one that I had, and somebody sent me an offer and they did not check, even though we were on the side of the seller, they didn't check that I was representing the seller. Now, that was my listing. Obviously, anybody who takes something out of FMLS, you should always check that that broker is representing the seller, because they have to be representing the seller to put it in FMLS. But no, that's not clear to everybody. So you have to put that little check. And when the buyer agent sent the offer, she didn't check that. Well, I didn't notice that. So I have to do an amendment to say that we're representing the seller. It's just a bunch of wasted paper, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
anyway, can't really just check that because that's a signed contract. So you have to do an amendment. That's what they're saying. So it's just stupid, if you ask me. But never, if there's a problem with what you had and you had to correct it, yes, you can send it to me and I will look at it and see if it's been corrected appropriately. So it really
Okay,
doesn't
thank you, Ruth.
back to compliance. It really just has to come to me for our office.
Okay, thank you.
Flag or something, I'm supposed to look at it when you do that. But I think, what do you have to put right in front of you, the name? Oh God, is it a star? Is it I don't remember. When you're sending a note to somebody, put some kind of symbol right in front of it to go to where it's supposed to go. You know what I'm talking about?
No. Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You all wouldn't know about that because it's just something with command, but it's a little thing that you put in doing a note within that particular contract. I'll have to go and look it up and tell you what it is. I'm not sure. I'll let you know in a few minutes. Okay, sorry. I'm
Thank
taking note.
you.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay. So any other questions for us, Connie? We're ready. She's gotten them all. Well, what did you have for us?
All right, so I've got one, and you and I have had discussions on this before, but so tax bills, and a lot, and not y'all's office specifically, but different attorneys' offices will end up, we're utilizing, our system as a lender is going to pull the previous tax bill, right?
Mhm.
Just automatically once we've got a contract. And there are certain times where, historically, anywhere in Gwinnett, Fulton, you're looking at about 1.2% of the purchase price is more of a realistic tax amount.
Okay.
So $500,000 house would be $500 a month for the borrower. there are times where we'll pull the previous tax bill and it may be $200 lower than what I would expect to be realistic, that we're still able to utilize that tax amount. Other times where the attorney is coming back and saying, no, here's an estimated tax amount. And then at that point, once our closers see that, we're required to use normally what that amount
Mhm.
is. So can you talk about when that happens, why that happens?
Yeah, so part of what we send is an estimate. And so last year's tax bill is an okay estimate, but as we all know, taxes tend to go up. So to use last year's tax bill is almost ensuring that there'll be not enough money in the escrow account, which if that's what a lender wants us to use, that's fine. We can say this is what last year's taxes are, not estimate it. Our kind of default as far as estimating it, and when that happens is when we send over what we call the binder or the commitment to you guys. So fairly early on, once we get title back from the examiner, and we put all that together and send it over to the lender. And so there's different calculators that we have to estimate what that tax bill is going to be based off of the sales price and based off of course, what county they're in, what that millage rate is. And we typically are not, unless asked, including exemptions. So we can add in those exemptions if the county will share it with us. Not all counties will share it with us. So sometimes the best bet is to just go on and use last year's tax bill, and that's fine. But different lenders also have different requirements. Like it's not every single lender, the second we send it, they're locked in. Like we can revise it and resend it for some people. So kind of creating a system that works for all counties, for all lenders is tricky to nail down the perfect one, because a lot of lenders don't just want to see last year's bill.
Right.
They want to know, okay, what money do we need to do to make sure there's enough in that escrow account to not have a shortage? So that, like yours, that is top 5 most frustrating parts of the process, because it's very difficult to make everybody happy. And we are certifying that to some degree. And so for us to say, oh yeah, there's never going to be any changes, doesn't really do y'all a whole lot of good in the long run.
Right.
In the short run, it helps qualify for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Helps the monthly payment for sure.
Yeah.
But then when there's a shortage and you have to ask people for extra money, then sometimes come back saying you underestimated the escrow.
And that's what's tough, just to this topic. There's times where we've got a client who wants to max out. They found their perfect home. It's $10,000 higher than we're pre-approved, or $5,000 than we're pre-approved for. We're trying to work through numbers. I'm pulling the tax bill and realizing, okay, if we use last year's tax bill, they qualify for it. If we come back and we get something for the attorney and it's jacked up, it's $200, $300 higher monthly, then they don't qualify. So that's on our side, it's scary because we need to make sure we've got that before the end of the financing contingency, or this day and age, how quickly things are moving. We need it fast. So
Yeah. And I wonder, so who sees it? You can't take back.
So once we have it uploaded and it's in, and that's Doug for us is the one who orders it. He's just somebody in the closing department. If it's uploaded into the underwriter's file, that's when we can't go back.
Can't go back.
Can't go back.
So does Doug send them to you before he uploads them?
He does. Yes, he's supposed
Okay.
to. There's been.
So what we could do is when Doug gets it, sends it to you, just say,
Yes.
hey, can we use last year's bill? We can
Yes.
amend it
Review.
and go from there before it hits the underwriter.
Yeah.
So that's a fine way to do it, because, it's fine for us to use last year's tax bill as the estimate, but the way our tax sheets, what we call them, are set up, it has last year's taxes, then estimate for 2023. So if all we ever gave was last year's taxes, there'd be no need to have an estimate for 2023 box,
Right.
if you will.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit of going back and forth to make all the processes line up. But that's an important thing to think about. And y'all think about HOA costs when you're showing houses to clients, because if you have someone who's pretty close to maxing out, then that HOA could put them over the edge. Especially some of those condos that are a little bit closer to the city, they can run like $800 a month. That makes a huge difference. And that's not part of their monthly payment, but it is part of what they're going to spend per month to own that property. And so that's a piece that can mess a lot of things up. And that's a piece that neither us nor the lender really has control over until we get that letter from the HOA. So your community association disclosure is going to tell you what the seller thinks the monthly amount is or the yearly amount, however it's paid, right? But sometimes those costs go up and sometimes they change them. So we have to have that letter before it's definitive. And that's unfortunate when that comes back after financing contingency.
Yeah, there's an
'Cause it
assessment.
could.
Yes,
Mhm.
and that's why we always preach, utilize anything with the condo that comes back that may have an effect. There's ways that we're able to issue denial letters. So and more specifically, this was one topic I wanted to talk about is if you've got right now financing contingencies, we're trying to go as short as possible, but you've got a condominium buyer maybe putting down 5-10%. We've got to get those HOA documents in and they've got to be reviewed by our condo team. Ashley, you've sent out the condo verbiage for the
Mhm.
special step.
Mhm.
They
Let
can
me see
give
if I can find the
they,
number
they
for
can
it.
they can give us a ton of time. I've utilized that sheet you gave me. But it still shows if we're trying to go aggressive, there's multiple offers on the property. They've been pre-underwritten. We can still do 1-day finance or 5-day financing and then have the coverage for the HOA or condominium being approved and ask for 14 to 20 days. And that's easy to explain. A lot
Mhm.
of times I have conversations with the listing agent, so they know as long as the association is good, we're good to go.
Yeah, and it's just so y'all know, it's GAR Special Stip 528 contingency for receiving condominium questionnaire. And so what that is really talking about is the lender getting those docs to approve the HOA. Now, I don't think that stip specifically speaks to, hey, that comes in too high, so I'm gonna terminate because the actual cost of the HOA is too high. Note that this questionnaire is not the same thing as an HOA closing letter.
Yeah.
So the closing letter is gonna have all the different fees, how much the seller still owes, if there's violations, if the HOA is in litigation, all that stuff. The questionnaire, I think, focuses more on like the actual safety of the building, because that's what the lender wants to make sure is that their collateral is not going to crumble like the condo building in Florida. So most of those questions are speaking more to that and like the budget. Do you have enough money to make the repairs, all that stuff, as opposed to like, this is what it's going to cost the borrower to live there. And I did have that question the other day. I had an agent arguing with me about who was paying for what. And I had another file where a buyer had sworn up and down that they had paid for a closing letter. So I think there is a little bit of confusion on what is needed from an HOA for a transaction. If your buyer has paid for something that the lender needs, that is not an HOA closing letter. It's never going to be an HOA closing letter. It's a questionnaire, it's documentation, but it is different information. And what had come up partially in one of the files was that the CAD definitely says that the seller pays for the HOA closing letter. The buyer had paid for the questionnaire for their lender. And they were saying that since they had paid for that, the seller needed to reimburse them at closing because that was a prepaid item. Therefore, it was a closing letter. It was not a closing letter. It was two separate things. So the buyer went, it was like the day before closing calling us saying, hey, I don't see where I'm getting reimbursed. We're saying, well, you don't get reimbursed for that. So they went in thinking they were going to get like $400 from the seller that they didn't get because that's not what their contract says. And so the agent's question to me was, okay, I see what you're saying, but show me on the settlement statement where the seller's paying for the closing letter. It's not on the settlement statement because keep in mind, 85% of HOAs require payment before they will even give us the letter, which means the seller has to go pay the HOA directly for us to get the letter to be able to use at closing. And the CAD says that the seller will do this. I think they've got 2 days from when they receive notice from the attorney to log in and make that payment. So it wasn't on the settlement statement because we didn't need to collect anything. We didn't need any reimbursement because the seller paid the HOA directly. So I think that question might come up a little bit more as far as the cost that a buyer might pay for the lender to get the documentation as opposed to a closing letter. They're not the same thing, different info on those two sets of documents.
Any questions on that?
HOAs and the CAD are everyone's favorite.
Yes.
I'm also seeing a lot more special assessments through HOAs. It's like I felt like I went years without seeing any, and
Yeah.
now like a third of the files have some sort of special assessment. And so pay attention if you represent a seller to disclosing those correctly as well, because your seller is going to be obligated to pay for ones that they don't disclose. So just like the actual initiation, transfer, capital contribution fees, the special assessments have another section. It's kind of at the bottom of the first page of the CAD, and that goes over special assessments that are in place, as well as special assessments that are being considered. So if your seller, it's like, well, we've talked about it, but nothing has been voted through yet. Don't say, oh, well, don't worry about it. Make sure they're disclosing those too. And there's very clear spots for them to disclose things. So make sure that's taken care of, and how that special assessment is paid and when it comes due really defines who is going to pay for it at the closing if it was disclosed. If it's not disclosed, your seller's stuck with it. But if they disclose it correctly, depending on when it's paid and how it can be paid, is who is going to actually make that payment at the closing table. And so it doesn't matter what it's for, it matters when it's due. So let's say you have a closing on May 15th, and there's a special assessment that was due, May 10th, and it's to redo the roof. Well, the seller's going to say, what do I care if there's a new roof? It's not my building. That benefits the buyer. They should pay for it. But if they, even if they did disclose it in this scenario, it was due as of the closing date, the seller's paying for it, period. So if that's something that's important to your seller, you need to have some sort of special stipulation overriding that, right? Buyer to pay $500 special assessment due from HOA at closing, or due to HOA at closing. That would override it because it's a special stip. But if you don't do something like that, it's due before closing, the seller has to pay for it. Or even if it's due on the closing date, seller has to pay for it. Only time buyer has to pay for it is if it was disclosed and it's due after the closing date.
So if it's disclosed, if they're considering adding it, say 3 months after the closing date. Does that go into the equation of the debt to income ratio? Do I have to?
Not normally with special assessments, it's a one-time fee.
Right.
Yeah, so if they're, if it's due, it's going to be on the buyer side closing disclosure, and they would have to pay that at closing. That wouldn't necessarily impact their debt to income ratio unless they were adding it to the, basically the monthly amount was changing, which does sometimes happen. Yes, come on in.
Come on in. Yeah, and sometimes really the only time we're gonna have a buyer paying for it at closing, because most of the letters are not gonna say, hey, we have this special assessment that's due in 6 months, but don't worry about collecting it. We never see HOA letters like that. They could say, hey, we have a special assessment due next month. Can you go ahead and collect it? Okay, then we put on the buyer side. Or what we'll see is there's a special assessment. It's due either now or it can be paid in monthly installments. So then we would separate the monthly installments. Again, if it was disclosed correctly, we would separate the monthly installments to where anything due up to closing date, seller's responsible for, anything after that, buyer's responsible for, even though they're saying it's due now, if it's paid in installments and our letter says that, then the installments after closing can be on the buyer side. But if it's not passed yet, like in your example, it's under consideration, it'll be on the CAD. It's probably not going to be passed when the closing date comes around. So it won't be on the settlement statement at all. It'll just be like a one-time payment buyer has to come up with in a few months or whenever.
So there's a notice at that point.
Yeah. So it's an important point to make sure you're reviewing the CAD with your buyer. Like, oh, looks like there might be a $1,500 special assessment that's in the works. Maybe think about saving up for that in case that does get passed. Like one of those kind of conversations might be a good conversation to even, do the email like I talk about for title insurance and for surveys. Hey, just wanted to, summarize our conversation. Remember the CAD had, XYZ special assessment. So be on the lookout for that in the future if it gets passed.
And also just to point on the condo insurance policies usually have a provision to pay for this assessments. Up to a certain amount, special, it's gonna be on the policy. Yeah.
I believe you. You're the insurance man.
There's gonna be a provision there on the declarations page that is issued in the condo policy that says the loss assessments or any kind of assessment is gonna be covered, but you have to be careful with the policy to see what kind of assessment is it. But usually it's an assessment by the HOA.
So you're talking about the buyers, their
Yeah.
insurance, not the master policy.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah. the
Okay,
buyers, yeah,
okay.
policy. Yeah.
interesting.
That's interesting. There's more than one option for insurance, isn't there? Depending on how they, when it was created.
It all got, in 2012, 2016, I forget when it was, it all got made the same, because there were so many different kinds.
Mm.
That went ahead and made it all the same from there on, so just the insurance agent.
But there are like two policies in that the master policy insures like the building and then
Correct.
each owner needs insurance for what they actually own, which is
Correct.
everything inside the walls. So that might be what you're thinking of, where it's two separate policies. But as far as like what's inside, I guess there used to be a bunch of different options and we don't really have as many options. So,
Correct.
okay, but yeah, the two,
And
you've
now
got
it's
the
figured out-
umbrella.
Now they help you cover the master policy deductible and your own deductible too.
I'd say that the biggest problem that I'm seeing where our condo team's running into a hiccup is through the master policy, which
Mhm.
takes a while to get. You'd think it'd be
I
easy, but
imagine.
we end up getting it and then realize that they don't have enough coverage. And then going back to the HOA and telling them you need to increase your coverage. Your premium's always gonna go up. That's when it becomes a battle. So that's probably the biggest
Yeah.
hiccup that I see with condos.
Mhm. Yeah, and also real quick before we move on
Yeah.
from special assessments, one more section that I want y'all to pay attention to, because you might have buyers like right there on the cusp. I can't afford a $5,000 special assessment kind of thing, which that most special assessments are gonna be for your big ticket items, like we need to replace the roof or, whatever kind of big ticket items there are. So most of them are fairly expensive, from what I've seen. And there is a section in that special assessments area that said if there is a special assessment that's in excess of however much money, that we have to know about it before closing, then the buyer can terminate the contract. So if you represent a buyer, then you want to be paying attention to that section of the CAD. I think it's right there with the special assessments, and be filling in a number. Because if your buyer doesn't have another $5,000, then you want to be filling in a number that's less than 5,000, that basically says, if the closing letter says that there is a special assessment that the buyer will have to pay, that's more than whatever number you fill in, then buyer can terminate the contract. But it does not work like if you leave it blank, that amount is zero. I think that provision just is not relevant. So it doesn't work the same as like the transfer initiation section. It doesn't really work the same as the special assessments, like as far as disclosing the amount. So if you want that to be relevant to your contract, don't leave it blank, or don't let the seller leave it blank. You got to have some sort of number written in there for that to be relevant. But pay attention to that section too, because that might save your buyer later on. If it's a real expensive assessment, words are hard to say back to back.
Especially on a Monday.
Yeah, right. My brain's not quite that awake yet.
I had another one, curious, so I know what I'm feeling on my end, but how are you seeing timelines for closings speed up right now? Like in terms of contract to close?
I didn't really see them slow down a whole lot. The only ones that are super fast are gonna be cash. Like I'm not seeing a whole lot of, I have a loan and I want to close in 2 week situations. I'm not seeing a ton of those, but I don't know that I saw a ton, maybe like right in the heat of COVID type things.
Yeah,
We saw that quick, but I would say most of them maybe are like 20 days is like average
okay.
of what I see, excluding the cash transactions. Those
Okay.
are always a little bit faster.
okay. I was just looking at data for us in April, and then so far we've averaged 15-day closing timeline on financing. And there's been several that
On financing or like on closing?
on closing, sorry.
Oh,
Yes,
not like the
yes.
financing
Not
contingency.
financing contingency,
Oh,
no.
it's like, that's so long.
Closing, we've had some that we've had to do 13-day closes, so
Mhm.
it's getting very competitive out there.
Yeah, I have heard that it's getting more competitive, so maybe, you see it before we do, right? Because you are walking through like getting under contract with the
Yeah,
client, kind of
sure.
alongside the agent. And then I don't see it till I actually get the binding contract. So there's
Yeah.
probably a few day, maybe even a couple week lag there, but definitely seeing more competition come about. And I've been saying this for a few weeks, maybe months now, but I think like the most competitive is that 600 to 900
Yeah.
Mhm.
block. That is just wild right now. And I think Alpharetta is like at the very top of how competitive things are. Like if you have a 6 to 9 in Alpharetta, you can almost guarantee you'll have multiple
You can
offers as long as it's pretty.
You can add double to that.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
just doing the same thing.
same.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, which I think, I've heard people say that it's because the people buying their second home, not second home like a vacation, but second home like I've already bought my first house and now I want to move into the second house I own, kind of second house people. They were not selling over the last, 6 months or so because they were worried about the interest rate and they were worried about the market, like, the viability of the market in general.
Right.
Now they've come to terms with the interest rate. Now they're comfortable that the market isn't going to crash. So now they're willing to make that move from house 1 to house 2. So I think that might be why we see that range being kind of hot right now.
And of course, over the summertime, when the kids are at school and stuff like that, out of school.
Yeah,
then they would do that.
seasonality,
Yeah,
for sure,
seasonality.
for sure.
Matt, you're only capable of doing those if they're pre-underwritten, right? Those 13-day closings.
So there's, I want to say yes, but the true answer is no. If there is a really clean, really clean client, it's W-2'd. I have every single document. Now that we have Nancy on our team who's going through every line item of the bank statements and different things, if it's clean, I've had to, and it was in Alpharetta, I've had to move quickly even without them being pre-underwritten. I hate saying that because I don't want you guys to think, oh, we don't really need to get them
Right, that's what happened.
to Matt early, but we've had to do it to win the deal. But again, if it's somebody who's self-employed and I've only put eyes on it, in that case, I definitely want either Nancy or my underwriter to look at it before I'm willing to do something quick and waive financing.
Well, and the house too, right? Because like you just said with the condos, you can't necessarily do that in that situation with
Yeah,
the HOA. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting back the condo docs. I mean, if this is what I notice is that the listing agent is involved in trying to hunt down the documentation that the condo team needs. That's when I get it the quickest. But we had one that was I thought 14 days would be long enough. And we were pressing and begging for documents from an HOA in Atlanta. We ended up having to extend. It was, I think, 18 days before we got everything that we needed.
Mhm.
So yeah.
And on that condo point, I think it's really important to understand that the lender has zero control over it. Like they request it, but if that HOA is going to sit on it, there's not a thing in the world that the lender can do to make that happen faster. And I think a lot of people think, oh, well, the lender needs it. It's a document they're getting. They should be able to turn around and grab it. What's the delay? You killed the deal, blah, blah, blah. And that's not true. They can't help it. Now, if they just like never request it, that's another problem. But that's obviously not going to happen with shelter. So they don't have control over how quick it is. And I will say, no matter what side you're on, that stipulation that has the condo, and what I say was, did you write down?
529,
Is it 529?
529.
It's not 528.
I wrote down. Did I mishear you?
Yeah, it's 528.
Oh, shoot.
There you go. Okay. But if you're using that step, I would make that longer than your financing contingency by quite a bit. And honestly, I would make it maybe not like the day before closing, depending on what your seller's, situation looks like. But at the end of the day, this is not really like a lender specific thing. Like there's guidelines, and if you guys can't approve it, the next lender probably can't either, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
But there are condo teams that are better than others. So a lot of times, this is what I've seen in the past, and I've had people flip over a condo that couldn't get approved, and the condo team for the other lender was only looking at Fannie Mae, and they never started analyzing, okay, what happens if we flip this over to Freddie Mac, and Freddie may have a lot of requirements removed that Fannie had, and they sent it over to us, and we were able to get it done. Of course, I didn't tell the other lender exactly how we were doing it, but
Right.
yes, so there's good and bad condo teams.
Yeah.
Not what?
I said not until after the closing, then you gave a
Courtesy call.
courtesy call as a one professional.
It was a lender in California.
No way. Giving people leg up.
Yeah.
But my point is that as a listing agent, I wouldn't bulk at a very long time frame in that stipulation, because it's going to be a problem for your seller, no matter who the buyer is. Either that condo is gonna end up getting approved because it qualifies under, one of those two,
Fannie or Freddie.
Fannie or Freddie, thank you.
Yeah.
Couldn't pull the names.
Mm.
Apparently brain's still not working. Either it's gonna qualify under one of those two or it's not. And so having that, it's not a huge risk to your seller. And if they don't get that info back, they're not gonna get that info back quickly with buyer B or buyer C. It's gonna be the same issue. So it's not really buyer centered. So I would make that time frame as long as you can.
While we're on still talking about condos, FHA spot approvals. So I've tried 3 different times and I've moved over to kind of a different mindset with it where we'll get documentation before we even submit an offer to see if it looks like it would work. Be careful. I've had in the last 6 months 2 contingencies to sell the property. So buyer was contingent on the sale, and both of my agents accepted an FHA spot approval for a condominium, and both got denied. I just say that to say it's very difficult to get spot approvals, FHA deals, where the condominium is not FHA approved. So just be careful on that. A lot of lenders will say, oh no, we'll do a spot approval, we'll do a spot approval. It's very difficult. So just be careful if you guys have a listing and you're about to accept an FHA offer that is spot approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do y'all know what spot approval is?
No,
I did not.
Yes.
This is Dina, and I do not know what it is. I was just trying to get off mute. What is it?
So condominiums, when you're trying to do an FHA loan on a condominium, you can go to FHA's website, approved condo website, and the HOA actually has to supply documentation. I think they pay kind of a small fee annually, but they do have to supply financials. And especially in Atlanta, there's not a ton of FHA approved condominiums where the HOA is approved through FHA. So what lenders will try to do is you can do a spot approval directly on one unit, and they still get financials for the HOA. They look heavily at delinquency numbers, how many investors own within that particular complex, and it's a deep dive into the HOA's financials, and it's very, very tough to get approved. So that would be for one where the condominium, the association is not FHA approved, and you're trying to get one unit approved through the transaction.
One unit. Okay, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
yeah, no problem.
And is that possible when you say the building's not approved? That doesn't mean the building is like been denied. It just means they haven't gone through the approval process at all. correct?
Or sometimes if you're looking at it, it could be just expired. So I
Yeah.
think, and don't quote me on this, but I think once you're approved, again, they have to pay a fee, but you're basically approved through those financials for 5 years. It could just be it expired, they didn't renew. There are some times where they've been denied.
Oh, you can still get spot approval if the
well-
building is like actively denied.
Well, no, not in that
Okay.
case. I mean, you could try, I suppose, but denial, ultimately it going, what word am I looking for here? Geez, now you're tired. Expired. Thank you. Goodness, sorry.
Wearing off on you?
Yeah, sorry, y'all. Ashley's wearing off on me. Technically, you can do a spot approval or try to do a spot approval on anything. If it's denied, you can still try it, but there's certain thresholds where if it's denied as a whole, you're probably not it's not really worth it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else on your list you got for us?
I was gonna ask you how long title's taking normally in Gwinnett, Fulton.
So that has been another fun thing that we've been dealing with recently. Is they're not coming back quite as quickly. So I think 7 days might be average, but we're seeing some of them take a little bit longer.
Okay.
And I know we've got, several files right now where the lender's very much in need of the commitment from us, which is essentially the information we send them based off the title exam to say, hey, this is what your policy is going to look like minus XYZ things that will get taken care of for closing, just so the lender can, see title and get comfortable as well. And we have several files where we just don't have the title back from our exam. So they are taking a little bit longer than they have in the past. I would say a week is kind of the minimum you should budget. Some of them are taking a little bit longer.
And the last one I had was,
Sorry, can I ask a question on that? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Ashley. It just seems like we had, and this may just be, why, do you have any idea why we'd be taking longer when technically aren't we having less closings overall?
yeah, no, I'm with you, and I don't really have a good answer for that. So we have a third party that runs the title exam, so it's not
Okay.
us going out and putting the title exam together. It's a separate firm that goes out and runs title and
Okay.
gives us what they call an abstract. And I think the real answer to your question is that since there are less sales, a lot of the industry has downsized, and there's literally less humans to go run these exams. I think
That would make sense.
I think
Okay,
that's
thank you.
really why.
Okay,
You know, if
Okay.
you've got a super quick closing, don't think we can't do it because, titles will take, 7, maybe 10 days to get back. If you need a rush, we can order it on a rush, and they're supposed to get it back in just a couple days. They're not quite nailing the timeline, but then, if we say, hey, this one is a rush, we need it back in, 2 or 3 days, then most of the time, we can get it back quicker than that 7-day time frame. But that's going to be for the closings that are really quick, not necessarily like the lender would prefer to have it early on, so we need to order it on a rush. It's like we actually really have to have it for closing, because if we start
No,
ordering
I-
everything on a rush, there are no more rushes.
right, and I know, and I understand that you guys do fantastic. My question was more trying to still understand the market and how to just think through what's happening every day, because it's so different out here. So thank you. That I think that's probably a very good, valid reason. So thanks.
Yeah, of course. And like I said, if you have a closing that needs to happen quickly, just, we'll see that when you send the contract over, and we'll order it on a rush. Typically anything that's closing in like under 2 weeks, we ask for it to be rushed. Anything over than that, longer than that, we can typically order it regular and then stay on top of the examiner to get it back. But on that point, how long do you guys need in between getting title from us and closing? Like, what is the absolute minimum?
I mean, preferably we have it before we send out the CD, the ICD.
Mhm.
So we need, 5 days prior to closing? I mean, the earlier we get it and can clear that, it's just
Yeah.
it'll be a remaining step. So
Right.
the earlier we can get it, but
But when do you say we have to push closing out because we don't have title?
ICD, when it's ICD day.
So 5 days.
Yes, yeah, there's times where I can ask for an exception and say, hey, we don't have title back, still need to get this out to hit closing date for X, Y, and Z reason, and they'll
Mhm.
waive it, but
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, and that's good to keep in mind when you have if you're doing a 15-day
Closing,
close
yes.
with a loan,
Yeah,
then thinking about maybe we might have to end up extending because title isn't back yet.
Right.
Again, we're probably going to order that on a rush, but something that's maybe 18 days that doesn't get ordered on a rush, and then the examiner takes a little bit longer, that might be something that
Yeah.
crops up. So just curious how long y'all need.
last thing, unless anybody's got a question on that, last thing I was gonna go over, so the special step, basically, if a contingency ends on a weekend, it
Mhm.
moves to the following business day, right? Is that a special step that you?
There
Is
is a
there-
step
or is
for
it?
that. That's
Okay.
not how the contract is set up. The contract is set up, the only thing that auto extends is closing day. But you can put a stipulation saying if any contingency ends on a weekday, it's moved to the next business day. I don't know the stip number, but I think GAR has one. I'm pretty sure. I'll double check that and see if they have one, but you can certainly write your own if they don't and
That's-
set that up. What I recommend doing instead of that is just count your days and have it land on a day that makes sense for everyone. That's far superior, because these auto extend things, people get confused. So they think just because it landed on a weekend, then maybe we shouldn't count weekend days, which they're wrong, but that is a confusion I hear about. Or it extends, sometimes people write, it'll extend to the following Monday. Well, then if Monday is 4th of July, did you really mean Tuesday, or did you end it on Monday, which didn't do you any good? And so what I would say is when you're putting a contract together, pull out a calendar, count the days, see where it's going to fall, and just have it fall on like a business day, not a holiday or a weekend.
If you can.
Hey, I have one
You
more
should be able to
question.
count all the days.
Speaking of special steps, I haven't thought about this for a while. It was a hot issue, maybe a couple of years ago. But do you have is there a GAR step for appraisal gap?
I don't think there's a GAR one. I think there is one that Seth Weissman, who, he's general counsel for GAR, that he wrote in like 2020. And I've worked with Enrique on putting some together, so he definitely has two. I like Enrique's better, to be honest, than Seth's, simply because Enrique's goes into detail on what happened, like gives it a floor. Right, so what I see is the biggest problem with a stipulation, with a gap stip, is people have gotten to where they're like, okay, we need to put a cap on it, so not to exceed sales price. That's important, because if you have a $500,000 sales price and you write a gap stip saying that the buyer will pay $10,000 over appraised value, and that's all you write, even if you write, if it comes in under sales price, if it comes in at $499, now you're paying $509, which is not what you meant, because your sales price was $500. So
Right.
putting that ceiling on it, people have gotten pretty good at it. What they've not really gotten good at is putting a floor on it. So, in the event the appraisal comes in lower than sales price, buyer agrees to pay $10,000 over appraised value, not to exceed sales price. In the event the appraised value comes in lower than X, then what happens? So what we were seeing is you've got the 500,000 sales price, you've got the $10,000 gap, then the appraisal comes in at 425. So does that mean the sellers agreed to pay it, or agreed to accept 435? Because the buyers definitely agreed to pay 435, but that seems like a seller might not actually want to sell their house if it comes in that much lower than what they agreed that they could get on it. Because for a lot of these people, they could just terminate the contract and then get a cash offer for 500, because there is no required appraisal, right? No
Right.
lender requiring that appraisal. So they didn't want to sell that. And then it became this huge fight. So what Enriquez says is what happens if it comes in lower than a certain amount. And really how we've got it set up is if it's a conventional loan, just saying that the actual appraisal contingency language in the form will still apply. So that comes into action, which gives both parties the chance to negotiate, right? Because we know in the conventional loan contingency exhibit, if the appraisal comes in low, then buyer has to send an amendment to the seller. If they want to lower the sales price, has to send an amendment to the seller saying appraisal came in low, we're going to amend the sales price. And then the seller can either sign the amendment, and that's the new sales price, or they cannot sign it. And if they don't sign it, then the buyer can terminate after the right amount of days have passed, right? They've given them time to sign it. So basically that comes into play. So maybe your seller says, okay, 475, that's the floor, because that means they'll get 485 because buyer's paying 10 over. So in the event the appraisal comes in below 475, then paragraph, I think it's 13 now, whatever paragraph is the appraisal contingency in conventional loan contingency exhibit X shall control. So you still have the time frame, you still have your appraisal contingency. It's just that's only going to come into play if it hits below a certain amount. If it's above a certain amount, then you've already agreed to pay the 10 over. Sellers agreed to accept that. Everybody moves on. So very
Okay.
long way of saying Enrique's got a great stipulation.
Okay, thank you. I'll hit him up.
Maybe
Okay,
we
and I've got it too. If you want to send me a message, I can send it to you as well.
Oh,
Maybe-
okay, awesome.
we announce that in the team meeting, because the people he's talking to are the only the people in his program. So maybe that would be good for him to announce in the general meeting. I'll
Okay.
suggest,
Yep.
or
Thank you.
maybe whichever you want to do.
Well, thank
All right,
y'all.
guys.
Thank y'all for joining us. I hope everyone has a great week. Call us if you need anything.
We're here for you.
Well, I have a comment about it. This is so much better for you all to be in the smaller room, because when you're in the meeting room, there's so much, it's hard here. And there's so few people usually that come actually to be in person. I think this would be a good way for you all to do this.
Okay,
Just my-
Okay.
that's fine with me.
Here you
You
are.
guys have been good. We appreciate you all so much.
Thank
You're
you.
Ashley, Matt.
love you,
Ruth,
Dina.
I love you guys and I really couldn't do this without you. So thank you for being there.
You're so
Yeah.
welcome.
Absolutely. Y'all have a wonderful week.
Bye, guys.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
I have a question, but we're not on time. About, it's simple, about community